Inequality is not a European invention. Every empire in history has run on some version of the same deal. The many work, the few own. Pharaohs had it. Roman senators had it. So did emperors in China, kings in West Africa, nobles across the Aztec world. What's rare is an idea that sets out to abolish that deal completely and actually ends up running a third of the planet. That idea didn't come from any of those older, bigger, often crueler empires. It came from a strip of factories and cities a few hundred miles wide in 19th-century Europe. So, what did Europe have that Rome didn't? That China didn't? That the Aztecs didn't? None of those empires had factories or a wage-earning working class concentrated in cities built around machines. Start with the ground this idea grew out of. It's not abstract. It's measurable. In 1787, Manchester had 44 cotton factories. By 1841, it had more than 1,100. The city's population had blown past 350,000. This was the fastest concentration of industrial labor the world had ever produced. Nobody had written the rules yet for what you owed the people working inside it. Up close, it looked like this. In 1788, 2 out of every 3 workers in England and Scotland's water-powered cotton mills were children. Boys as young as 4 worked as chimney sweeps. The death tolls are worse than the labor numbers. In the mill towns of Lancashire and Cheshire, 198 children out of every 1,000 died before their first birthday, twice the rate in the countryside. Across the water in Lille, France, 1 child in 4 didn't make it to age 3. And the cities were growing faster than anyone could manage. England and Wales went from 17% urban to 72% urban in 90 years. Europe's total city population went from 19 million to 127 million in a little over a century. That's tens of millions of people pulled out of villages and packed into slums beside factories that owned their hours, their wages, and a lot of their children. That's the soil. Here's the seed. Marx did not invent the idea that this system was rotten. That critique was already older than he was. In 1796, in the chaos following the French Revolution, a journalist named Gracchus Babeuf organized a conspiracy to overthrow the French government and replace it with a society built on common property. No private ownership at all. The plot was betrayed. Babeuf was guillotined in 1797. But the account of his conspiracy got written down and republished decades later, and it's part of where the word communism itself comes from. A French aristocrat, Henri de Saint-Simon, had been writing about it since the early 1800s. So had Charles Fourier. And in Scotland, a wealthy mill owner named Robert Owen actually tried to fix it from the inside. He took over the new Lanark mills in 1800 and ran them on a simple bet. Treat the workforce decently, and the mill still turns a profit. He opened Britain's first infant school there in 1817. Marx and Engels would later brand men like Owen utopian socialists. Decent instincts, no real theory of history underneath them. What Marx brought to the table wasn't the outrage. The outrage already belonged to everybody. What he brought was the machinery. He built that machinery out of a very specific German argument. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel and a circle of radical students known as the Young Hegelians spent the 1830s and 40s arguing about how history actually moves. Marx took Hegel's idea that history advances through conflict and collision, stripped out the mysticism, and grounded it in things you could count: property, wages, class. Then he leaned hard on British economics, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and pushed their own logic further than either of them was willing to go. Put it together, and the pitch is this: capitalism isn't a moral failure you can reform your way out of. It's a system. Systems run on laws. And the law here, Marx argued, points straight at collapse. The theory was clean. The men who built it weren't, and that detail almost never makes the highlight reel. Friedrich Engels, Marx's co-author, his closest friend, and for most of Marx's adult life, his only real source of income, was the son of a textile manufacturer. The family firm, Ehrman and Engels, ran a cotton mill in Manchester. His father shipped him there in 1842, hoping factory-floor life would cure him of his radical politics. It did the opposite. Engels used his time there to research the book that made his name, The Condition of the Working Class in England, and years later became a 20% partner in that same mill. Profits from that Manchester cotton operation are what financed the writing of Das Kapital. The man who helped build the intellectual case against capitalism was, on paper, a capitalist. That's the contradiction sitting at the center of this entire story, not a footnote to it. The two men properly met in Paris in August 1844. By 1847, they joined a small underground group in London called the Communist League. Total membership, roughly 20 people. That November, the League's leadership commissioned the two of them to write down, once and for all, what the organization actually believed. The document that would become the Communist Manifesto. Marx sat on it for 2 months. It was the deadline, February 1st, 1848, that finally forced it onto paper. Publishing the manifesto wasn't an ending. It was an opening bid. The revolutions of 1848 burned out inside a year, crushed one country at a time by armies still loyal to the old order. Marx spent the next decade and a half mostly alone, writing in the reading room of the British Museum, broke, watching 3 of his own children die young in a cramped flat in Soho. Then, in 1864, the idea got a second act. Marx helped found the International Working Men's Association, the first international, at a London meeting that drew roughly 2,000 workers. 3 years later, he published the first volume of Das Kapital. And in 1871, Europe got its first real trial run. After France collapsed in the Franco-Prussian War, the workers of Paris seized the city and ran it themselves for 2 months, the Paris Commune. It ended in what the French still call La Semaine Sanglante, the Bloody Week. Estimates of how many communards were killed range from around 10,000 to well into the tens of thousands, depending which historian you trust. Even at the time, battlefield deaths and summary executions blurred together in the record-keeping, and historians are still disputing the real number today. Whichever number you land on, it was the government's own army doing the killing, and it was over in about a week. Marx read the Commune's defeat as proof of concept, not discouragement. That it ended in a massacre didn't undo, in his telling, that it had happened at all. This is where the story is supposed to end, according to Marx's own theory, and doesn't. Marx was explicit about the sequence. Revolution comes first, where capitalism is furthest along. Britain, Germany, wherever the factories are biggest and the working class is largest, angriest, and most organized. It never happened there. Not in 1848, not in 1871, not ever. Instead, in October of 1917, it happened in Russia, a country where roughly 80% of the population were peasants, not factory workers. a country where serfs had only been freed from their landlords in 1861 and were still making redemption payments for that freedom decades later. Lenin's Bolsheviks didn't take power on the strength of an industrial proletariat. They took it on the strength of a starving, war-exhausted peasantry, and three words nearly anyone in that country could understand: peace, land, and bread. Marx had been dead 34 years. The theory he built by watching Manchester got its first real-world trial in a country that barely had a Manchester of its own, and Marxists have been arguing about that gap ever since. Where the idea was actually born and where it first seized power turned out to be two different questions with two different answers. So, why Europe? Because in about 100 years, Europe built something the world had never seen before. A continent-spanning machine of factories and cities generating staggering wealth and staggering misery in the same breath, fed by a German philosophical tradition that insisted history moves in a direction, and staffed by a brand new class of people, concentrated and organized in a way no working population had ever been before. Marx and Engels didn't invent any single piece of that. They fused it, and the fusion outlived them both. Through a revolution neither of them lived to see, through a Cold War that split the planet in half, through the Berlin Wall coming down in '89, and the Soviet Union dissolving 2 years after that. What they finished under a deadline in February of 1848 outlived the empires that were built in its name. 170-some years later, it's still in print, still translated, and still being argued about.